So yesterday, for those of you that weren't here, we basically just went over general structure, elements of a speech. So we talked about the introduction, we talked about body paragraphs, and we talked about the conclusion of a speech. So that's kind of what a speech looks like on paper. So if you were writing a speech, this is what it looks like. But now we want to get into the actual part of giving a speech. Like, how do you give a speech? Like simple tactics onto like how making or giving your speech comes off better, etc. This is what a speech looks like on paper, and then this is what a speech is going to look like when you actually give it. So, do we have questions already? Let's see. Okay. You can't hear properly. I think that might be on your end. Try resetting your internet, maybe, or you can even try leaving and coming back, Vivian, or I guess it's Vivian. I don't know. Vivon. Okay. Yes. So yeah, writing the speech isn't that different from an essay, which is what we talked about yesterday. So it's not that different from an essay. This is the part where it gets different, like significantly different from writing an essay. And so the thing that I'm always going to come back to in this like lecture and in general, something that I want to see when you're giving your speech is this idea of confidence. And confidence in a speech isn't just like, I mean, yes, it is how confidently you do your, you say your stuff and how confidently you know it, but it's also a lot about appearing confident, appearing relaxed. I don't really care if you are confident or not. I care that you appear confident when you give your speech, because no one's like truly going to be 100% sure for what they're saying, or there will be people that are close to that, but no one's going to be truly confident, especially at this stage in giving a speech. The trick is you have to appear confident, and that's the most important part. Everything you do when it comes to verbally giving the speech, when it comes to non-verbally giving the speech, everything you do is all meant to back up this idea of confidence. That's what everything comes back to. So just like in your speech you have a thesis, when you're giving a speech, everything comes back to being confident. And so with that in mind, the first thing that I'm going to talk about is ways of showing nonverbal confidence. And this is probably the most important part. As they say, like, like quote, whatever it is, like nonverbal communication is like 70% of communication, or, whatever it is. It's true. Like how you come off nonverbally really indicates whether you know what you're saying, whether you don't know what you're saying. And that starts from the very second you enter the room when you're giving a speech. So most times when you're giving a speech, and obviously, once again, like same with yesterday, a lot of this does change on the situation or scenario. But when you're giving a speech, a lot of times you'll be entering a new place to give your speech, right? Let's say you're at some competition and you're giving a speech, you'll have to enter the competition room. Or let's say you're giving a speech to your classmates. Sometimes you might be outside of the classroom till you give your speech, and then you'll walk in. And so your the entire atmosphere that you're supposed to create of confidence begins the minute the people that are going to listen to your speech start seeing you, the minute for you enter the room. And like, okay, you might think that entering the room is something simple, that like how could you mess up, right? Or how could someone enter the room some much better than you? But the thing is, even little things that start off before like your speech starts can really derail or sideline your attempts at your speech. For example, take someone who is about to give you a speech and enters the room, and let's say this dude walks in and he trips over like the door stopper, right? His shoes are untied as he walks in, and let's just say he's wearing a suit, his blazer is buttoned wrong. That gives you a very different message than someone who, looks like he's about to present, looks professional, and just walks straight in, relaxed, and like plants himself, let's say, in the middle of the room. Those are two completely different images. And you're more likely than not going to be more inclined towards believing the person who walked in confidently, the person who walked in relaxed, as per se, than the person who came in like stumbling over everything. Like, after all, if they can't even enter a room, how do you know, that they're going to give their, how do you know that they know what they're talking about when they give their speech? So the whole, like this whole aspect of giving a speech, it starts before you actually give your speech. It's the minute like the audience begins seeing you. It's kind of like a first impression almost, I guess you could say. And obviously this changes depending on the situation. This whole part about like getting the beginning correct is far less important if you're giving a speech to friends, let's say, convincing them of some movie that you want, but it's still true for most speeches you'll probably give. Okay, now the second is also pretty important. So the second is this notion of body position when you're giving a speech. So what this means is that you want to remain, as a general rule, if you want to remember, you want to remain still, but like pretty still, but not like soldier still. Like you're not in the military. You're not gonna, be super stiff. You want to be still, but not stiff, if that makes sense. So, for example, like swaying and stuff like that is all distracting because if you sway, normally the reason people sway is because they're so focused on what they're giving, their speech, on what they're saying, they can't really control their body. What like they just go resort to like whatever nervous tics. Maybe they play with their pockets, they sway a bit, they lean heavily on one foot, whatever it is. Normally they do that unconsciously. They're not focused on it, which also signals to someone that might be watching that, oh, hey, he or she is not really in control of the speech. She doesn't know what she's talking about as much as someone who would just look, straight with a straight body position and just giving the speech without, doing anything distracting. Okay, so that kind of covers body position. I think the thing to remember here, it isn't like a huge thing, but the thing to remember is you don't want to sway. So maybe when you're giving a speech in practice, you catch yourself swaying, you should tell yourself to stop, right? And you can point yourself out when you start swaying. And you don't want to do anything abnormal. Like you don't want to be distracting. Like you don't want to be, leaning on one foot heavily to the point where it's kind of weird, like you're in a workout or something, or, whatever it is. You just want to remain as normal as possible. So I'm not saying like stand soldier still, but you want to remain relaxed, if that makes sense. Okay, so the third is hand gestures. And for this, actually, I'm gonna draw out a little timeline, whatever line, number line, whatever it's called. Okay, so for hand gestures, you'll be one of these three. And the hard part is actually getting to the middle from negative. So when I say negative, I mean that hand gestures hurt you when you're giving your speech. So what I mean by that is, and this is where most people fall under, is if your hand gestures are something like whenever you give a speech, if you find yourself, let's say, playing with your thumbs the whole time, like while you're giving your speech, your hands might be down there, but they're playing with your thumbs, or they're playing with your pockets, or even going inside your pockets. Or, like some people keep their hands up the entire time when they speak. Some people like point at random things. All of those things fall under negative. Why? Because they're distracting from the message of your speech. And when it comes to hand gestures, I think that like 80 to 90% of people overdo them. So what I mean by that is they use their hands too much. So the hard part will be getting from negative to neutral. And that's kind of what I want you guys to focus on versus actually using your hand gestures to help your speech, because neutral basically means you're not using any hand gestures. Your hands aren't distracting, they're not stiff, but they're by your side, like again, not soldier stiff, but they're relaxed and they're not moving anywhere. They're just there, right? No one's looking at your hands, but no one's getting distracted by your hands, if that makes sense. But neutral isn't bad. It's not a bad place to be. So whenever, people are like, oh, you got to use your hands, that's not true. Because if you're neutral, then if you're doing everything else correct or everything else well, no one's going to notice, right? Because, your hands aren't distracting from you. On the other hand, if you're negative and let's say you're giving like an amazing speech, if your hands are really distracting, you might lose some audience members that are focused on, what thumb war is going down with your hands rather than what you're actually saying. So the point is, the big thing to remember is you don't want to be distracting, which also has to do with the whole confidence element, because if your hands are, out there fighting with themselves, well, it doesn't really look like you know what you're saying, or it looks like you might be nervous, for example, which, while it might be true, doesn't exactly help this image of appearing confident. As far as positive hand gestures go, I'm not going to spend too long on them, but the big thing is basically these are hand gestures that support your message. For example, like if let's just say I was giving a speech about, let's just say I wanted to gesture about something that was like, let's say small, right? So let's say I have let's just say I have a small water bottle next to me, right? So I could say something like, I have a small water bottle, and I would use my hand to show what I'm saying. Or let's say I have like, let's say there's a massive whiteboard next to me. I could be like, the whiteboard next to me is massive. So that kind of shows you, it serves to enhance what I'm saying, basically. And those are harder said than done. There are some pretty easy ones, like, like as I just said, doing big and small with your hands. Those are pretty easy. But the main focus that I want you guys to think about is making sure you're not doing anything on the negative side. Making sure you're not playing with your thumbs while you speak. Making sure you're not playing with your pockets. Making sure your hands are relaxed whenever you don't want them to be doing something. And what I mean by that is, basically, your hands aren't functioning out of a mind of their own. You are in control of your hands when you speak. That's the important part. And if you can control your hands, you can get to neutral. And once you get to neutral, you can get to positive pretty quickly. I'm not worried about that. I'm more worried about you guys not doing anything to distract with your hands. Okay. So now let's talk about walking. So a lot of times, some people don't walk at all when they speak. Some people walk too much. They pace. There are people that like pace up and down when they speak, and there's everything in between that, right? There are people who walk a little bit, people who walk a lot. And for me, as a rule of thumb, I think that every time you walk, there needs to be a purpose. You shouldn't walk with no purpose. And I personally think that you should walk in between your major points of your speech. So for example, yesterday we talked about introduction, we talked about body, and we talked about your conclusion. I would walk, let's say after I finish the introduction, I would walk here. Then you go into your body paragraph. So let's go back to your student council speech, right? You've introduced yourself here, and you've given the two reasons, like that you're intelligent and that you're honest. So then your first body paragraph, you're telling them all about how you're intelligent. And when you finish that body paragraph, maybe you walk again. And now you're talking about how you're honest in your second body paragraph. Then you finish that, and then you walk again. And now you're in your conclusion. And so then you finished up your speech. So that's kind of what I mean by walking in between points. I want you to walk to make a point, because walking is kind of a visual way of signaling that you're moving on. And when the audience sees you walk, they would associate it with, okay, he's moving on from a point, he's changing ideas. And so you want to align with that. You want to change ideas when you walk. Let's see, do we have a question? No. Okay. Cool. Okay, so yeah, so that kind of covers walking. So walking, again, over like when we do practice speeches, it's not going to be a big deal because you're not going to be able to walk in front of a screen, obviously. But something to keep in mind for later when you're giving a speech is that you want to walk to make a point. Don't just walk because you don't know what to do. That's weird. And another thing that you want to keep in mind is when you're giving a speech to an audience, you only want to walk towards them. You don't want to like back shuffle. Like that's just weird, right? You've never seen someone give a speech and back shuffle. So you want to walk, you want to basically maintain the distance between you and your audience. And if you walk, you want to either walk sideways or towards your audience. Don't go backwards. Okay, let's see. Okay, so these are some good questions here. Okay, what if you trip on someone? That, I mean, like that, you should just be able to look out for and see. Like, don't trip on people. Would we sort of walk in place? No. Okay, so I don't know what you mean by this question, but I'm assuming if you're talking about online, like right now, I don't want you to walk at all. Like in front of a Zoom call, there's no point in walking. And don't walk in place if you're giving a real speech in person. That's also kind of weird. That I don't know. I don't even know how that would work. Would you walk when you want to show something? Hold on, I'll come back to that because I think I'm gonna ask you to explain that. How would you walk? How would you make it not look like you plan to walk at a certain time in your speech? Okay, so that is a good question. So your walk, you want it to be natural in the sense that, for example, if you're moving on from talking about how you're intelligent to how you're honest, right? In your student council speech that we talked about yesterday, so you would end your point about being intelligent, and then you would start walking by saying something like, now we can discuss how I'm the most honest person for this role. So the best way I can say it is you want it to appear as natural as possible. And you don't want to just like stop your speech completely, walk, and then continue. That looks really robotic, right? You want to keep talking while you're walking, and you want to make it seem like natural, like it's a natural flow of your speech. And the only way to really master that is with practice. Okay, wait. Akshaya, do you want to explain your question? You can unmute yourself.
So, like, say there's a water bottle on the other side of the room. Like, I would say, like, this water bottle over here is small. Would I go walk over to that and, like, or should I just point to it?
Okay, so I know what you mean. Okay, so basically, I mean, if you're using props or like things inside your speech, I would normally have them near you. I wouldn't have to walk towards to show them to you, but you can, like, let's say if you wanted to make a point and there was like a clock in the room or some like calculator in the room that you wanted to make a point, you could walk a little bit towards that to make that point. It's not something you normally see when someone's giving a speech because most people use either slides or they have their props with them. I would say if you know you're going to need props, keep them with you. Don't walk to get them during your speech. That'd be kind of weird. But yes. So it's not like an absolute rule, no. If that makes sense. Okay. Cool. Okay, so we've covered entering the room real quick. Let's slow down. We've covered entering the room confidently, basically. We've covered don't sway. Keep your body position pretty straight and relaxed. We've covered hand gestures in the sense that the main thing is you just don't want them to be distracting. As long as they're not distracting, they're not going to hurt your speech. And we've covered, to some extent, walking a bit in between like major points. The last one is eye contact, which is pretty self-explanatory, but you know, some people still get wrong, and it's a pretty big one because in my opinion, like a speech, the beauty of a speech versus an essay is that a speech is an opportunity to create a personal connection with your audience. If you're just reading off an essay, it's basically like reading an essay or like listening to an audio tape. There's no connection that's being made. So you really want to have eye contact. And what I mean by eye contact is that you want to basically look at your audience, and you don't want to be looking at like the ceiling or the ground, obviously, and you don't want to be reading your script the whole time, which is kind of why I don't like scripts. And so an easy way to think about eye contact, if you're intimidated by it, is you don't actually have to make eye contact with anybody. You don't have to look them in the eyes. That's kind of weird too. So instead, all you have to do is you just need to look in the general direction of your audience. Maybe you focus in on something that's interesting to you or something that you can easily get lost in. So for example, let's say you're staring at someone's like head or hair or like chair, whatever it is, you don't actually have to look people in the eyes. And that makes it easier because a lot of people are intimidated. Like they find themselves trying to make eye contact and then all of a sudden they're staring into someone's eyes for like a minute. You don't have to do that. That's not what eye contact means. It just means you need to look in the general direction of your audience. For example, like I've given plenty of speeches where, people would tell me like, oh, you definitely looked at me for a good part of the speech. And I would be like, I don't even remember looking at you because I was looking in their general direction, but I wasn't actually looking at them, if that makes sense. So eye contact, the big thing is just don't look at the ceiling. Don't look at the ground. Don't look at your script. Just look at the general area of people you're talking to. It's not that difficult, but people still find it difficult. And the big thing is when you get lost in your speech, don't look away. That's the big thing. When people get lost in their speech, like they forget what they're about to say, a lot of times they'll look at their hands or look at the wall to try and get them to remember what they're going to say. The wall's not going to help you. Your hands aren't going to help you either. I mean, a script would help you if you had it, but that's pretty much the only thing I could say you would look at if you got lost in a speech. Okay, let's see.
What did you just say? My internet collapsed.
Oh, okay. So we talked about eye contact, and I just said that you want to look in the general direction of your audience, and you don't want to look at the walls or like the ceiling. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, wait, let me see. Okay, yeah, try not to spam because I have to scroll up for questions. If you've not memorized your speech and you have note cards, how do you keep making eye contact without looking down too much? Okay, so what you should do for this, for note cards. So first of all, I mean, I've already said that I don't like note cards and scripts, but I understand that people use note cards. So I think an easy way to do it is on your note cards, you don't write out sentences. You write out like 2 or 3 words. That way you're not reading off your note card. You're looking down, looking at your 2 or 3 words, and you know what you want to say. So for example, let's say you were giving a speech on why, let's say, okay, why puppies are amazing, right? And so you could have a bullet point saying you could have a bullet point that just says very loyal. And so you're not going to go down and read out that word for word. Instead, like you'll look down, you're like, okay, yeah, they're very loyal. And so then you'd look back up and you'd start talking about how dogs or puppies are loyal and that's why they're amazing, right? That would be your speech, but you don't want to write it down word for word on your note card, because the thing is, when you write stuff down word for word, you have a temptation to read it. And when you start reading it, that's when you lose your eye contact. As long as you're giving your speech in your own words to your audience, you'll be making eye contact pretty naturally. If you don't have a script, what do you use? I don't use, whenever I give speeches, I don't like using anything, if that makes sense. But note cards aren't a bad way to go, especially in the beginning. They're good for practice. And I don't like memorizing either. So I'll talk a little bit, if we have time at the end, I'll talk a little bit about how I go about like thinking about my speeches. I think we'll have time, but we'll get to that after we finish this part. Cool. Okay, so we've talked about all the nonverbal stuff. And this stuff is actually the more important stuff. Even though a speech is, yes, verbal, the nonverbal stuff really makes or breaks your speech, because it can really distract from what you're saying. People can like lose track of all of what you're saying if some of this stuff goes bad. So now let's talk about verbal confidence. So the first thing is obviously projection. You don't want to be too loud. You don't want to be too soft. You don't want to be too loud because that's annoying. No one's going to listen to you after a while. They'll just think you're yelling and you'll probably lose your voice eventually. And you don't want to be too soft because, I mean, if people can't hear you, then, they can't hear you. So your speech doesn't really matter, right? So that normally people don't really have a big issue with that. I mean, projection isn't that hard to get right. There's no really like tips. If you want, sometimes if you're in a different room, when you introduce yourself, like you say, hello, my name is this, you'll really get a feel for how loud your voice is in the room. The biggest thing I've seen, honestly, sometimes is some rooms have really weird echoes. Like I've given a speech in like a weird, I don't know what it was. It was kind of like a church, but not exactly. And it had the weirdest echo, but sometimes you just got to live with it, right? So, okay, so the third one is the one that I really want to talk about, is this thing of this notion of like confident language. So what I mean by this is a lot of times you can say the same thing 3 different ways and it'll come off like very, very different. For example, if I said dogs are the best animal, that's an idea, right? But if I said, I think perhaps dogs might be the best animal, those 2 sentences come off very different, but they're the exact same idea, right? They're the exact same idea, but they come off very different. Or if I said something like, blue is the best color in the world, and then I said, I think that blue could be one of the best colors in the world. Like, I'm trying to say the same thing, but one of them comes off much stronger than the other. And so when I say confident language, what I mean is that if you don't have to use words like usually, maybe, probably, perhaps, don't use them, right? Because sure, everyone knows you're not 100% sure about everything you're saying, but you don't have to add in words like mostly, usually, this usually happens, probably. You don't have to add those words in. They're implied. Don't add them in. It doesn't really make you look that good, if that makes sense. If every sentence you're like adding like a little caveat at the end, like this is probably correct, like that doesn't help you, right? I mean, you want a bit of the whole confidence thing is kind of faking it, a bit. So don't give it away that you're not 100% sure. And usually it's pretty implied. Now, with that being said, obviously you don't want to like completely misrepresent facts or anything like that. If it's a statistic, then don't like warp it to make it sound more confident. But at the same time, if you're just giving like opinions or sentences, don't use words like usually, maybe, perhaps, possibly, as much as you can avoid them. Yeah, so approximately is fine, right? Like, so you don't want to like twist facts, but at the same time you don't want to overload your sentences. Like I've seen people that talk with like perhaps, possibly, and usually all in one sentence, and I'm like, was that necessary? Probably not, right? So yeah, so okay, so when you say professionals looking at a script, I don't really think they memorize a few sentences. I think professionals have probably gone through their script a lot of times and they only look at their script to just remind themselves where they are. So they don't like look down and memorize. They've probably had a good chunk of it in their head. So they just look down, they know where they are in the script, and they probably just continue from there. Memorizing isn't bad, but I don't like it because it takes a lot of time. But if it's an important speech, like if I had to give an extremely important speech in front of people, I would probably memorize it just because I don't want to get it wrong. But that's more of like, you know, once in a 6 month speech rather than like just like a random speech for a competition that I wouldn't memorize. What about speed of speaking? Okay, yeah. So that's a good point. I think that for most of us, a good rule is slower is better because I've yet to meet a lot of people that speak too slowly for me, but I have met a lot of people that speak too fast. And an easy way is just think about like maybe if you're giving a speech and you're really getting excited yourself, then that's the most dangerous point because when you get really excited, you start thinking faster than you speak. And the reason you speak too fast is exactly that. It's because your brain is going faster than your mouth, basically. That's essentially what's happening. You're thinking too fast for your mouth. And that's when you start stuttering. That's when you start speaking too fast because you have to wait for, you know, like your voice, your words to catch up, if that makes sense. If your ideas are flowing in your head faster than you can say them, that's when you start stuttering. That's when you start pausing. That's when you start getting flustered, and that's when you start speaking too fast. So I think, yes, slower is better, in my opinion, because it's very rare that people are going to be like, oh, he speaks too slow. It's more likely that something you say will go over their head because you said it too fast. What are some tips for memorizing if we can't bring the paper or note cards? Okay, I will get to that question soon. Let's see. Okay, yeah, we have time. Okay, so as far as, okay, this is the last thing that I want to talk about when it comes to like this whole delivery aspect. And these are like verbal shifts. And so these are a little bit more complicated. This is a little bit more advanced stuff, but something that really makes your speech clean, basically, when you're giving a speech is shifts that indicate like a change in idea. So just like you walk to change ideas, you can change your tone, you can pause, and you can use language to shift inside your speech. Easy ways of remembering this is when you're giving an example inside your speech, you can say something like, for instance, for example. Those are all transition words, I guess. If you write essays, that's what they're called. But they really help indicate that you're changing ideas. And you need those because, as I said, like yesterday, the difference between a speech and an essay is, and an essay, if you don't understand something, you can read it again. In a speech, you don't get that shot. So you have to make everything more clear. And that's the reason basically essays are more concise than speeches usually, is because speeches really need to drive the point home because they can't go back, right? There is no like reverse button in real life. You can't like buffer back 30 seconds. So you need to make stuff clear by saying words like, for example, and then people will know you're talking about an example. Tone shifts are advanced. I'm not going to talk too much about them except for saying that if, you know, you can change your tone. If you switch from something happy to something sad, there should be a tonal shift. You should change your voice a bit. It would be bad to have your speech monotone the whole time, but again, like, this stuff is a little bit less important, a little bit more advanced for people that like have done other speaking stuff and are confident with the other stuff. Then you can look at like shifting your tone. Pauses too. pauses are better than stutters. So what I mean by that is if you don't know what you're about to say, take a pause instead of taking a stutter, if that makes sense. Don't like start fluffing your words. Just take like a 2-3 second pause, because even if you think it's awkward, usually, I mean, unless you're like pausing in between words or in between big ideas, usually people don't think it's weird. They'll just think it's a planned pause. Okay. Cool. So we've covered pretty much all of that. Let's see if we have more questions about this, and then I'll talk a little bit about what I do versus memorization, and then I'll talk a little bit about what I want you guys to do after for a speech. Let's see. Okay, yeah. So I'll get to the speech in a bit. I've already written out what I want you to do. Okay, are there questions over this? So I'll just really quick go over it. So the big thing is confidence. That's the big thing. Like if you come off as confident, your speech is going to go fine, basically. And then we've broken it up into nonverbal and verbal confidence. Nonverbal includes your body positioning, hand gestures, eye contact, walking with a purpose, and even when you enter your room. And verbal confidence is, of course, projection. Your language, the actual language you use, can convey confidence. And then shifts can also add into confidence because it really shows you control your speech. Let's see. What is the maximum time we should pause to avoid being awkward? Okay, that's an interesting question. And again, I can't give you a time limit on this because there are speeches that warrant much bigger pauses than others. For example, like I could say 5 or 10 seconds, but a president maybe might pause for much longer. I think Martin Luther King used to pause much longer in his speeches too because of the impact that his speeches had, right? He was giving civil rights speeches. Those are huge. So there really isn't a specific time limit, but if you give a lot of speeches in practice, you'll be able to sense when your pause is awkward, if that makes sense. So you'll be able to start picking up on, okay, this is a pause that's letting the message sink in, and this is a pause where people are like, why is he pausing? And usually, if you give a lot of practice speeches too, you'll be able to tell that from people's facial reactions too, right? If you give a weird pause, they're going to look at you like, what is he doing? Versus if you give a good pause, people are going to normally be more receptive, I guess, to your pause. So honestly, I can't give you a time on that. I think that's just, you'll have to judge that for yourself when you're giving a speech. Okay. So since a couple of people asked me what I do instead of memorizing, I'm going to real quick talk about that. So basically what I do is I remember my claims from my speech. So a claim is basically like the big points of my speech. So for example, it would be my thesis and then my 2 body paragraphs, like their topic sentences might be claims. So let's just go back to that student council speech. So my claims would be, I'm the best candidate. I'm the most intelligent candidate. I'm the most honest candidate, right? Cool. So we have my 3 big claims for the speech. I'm the best candidate because I'm the most intelligent and I'm the most honest. And so maybe like I can end it with, you should vote for me. There we go. Okay, so there we got like 4 claims down for that speech. Let's say this is like a 3-minute speech to your class. And the way I would do it is instead of memorizing, so I would see these claims and I'd remember these claims. These aren't too bad to remember, right? They're all kind of connected. And this should maybe take 5 minutes of remembering, especially if you're giving the speech from your own knowledge. Then basically I have this rule, which I just remember it myself. And it's that you should ask yourself why twice. So what I mean by that is, let's say I'm going to the second claim, if I'm the most intelligent candidate, I would ask myself, well, it's either why or how, it depends on the sentence, but I would ask myself why in my head twice. And the cool part is you can actually ask yourself out loud twice. So let's just say, okay, I'll give an example. So I would say something like, okay, the reason you should vote for me is because I'm the most intelligent candidate. Why is this the case? Well, I got a 2,000 on my SAT and I have the highest grades inside the class. Why is that the case? Well, it's because I spend 8 hours a day studying, I don't sleep, and I read books all night. right? So that's just an example of, that right there made sense. Like, it's an argument. I mean, sure, it wasn't actually true, but it's an argument as to why you're the most intelligent candidate. And then you can go one step further and say that because I'm intelligent, I'll be a good student leader, blah, 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 blah. But the point is that I came up with a good point, like a good section of a speech, just by asking myself why on my claim, if that makes sense. So I didn't memorize anything. I just, in my head, I asked myself why, and I actually did it out loud for you guys, right? I said, why is that the case? And you can do that in your speech too. It's not a big deal if you say that out loud. But that's kind of what I do instead of memorizing is I think about my big claims. What are my big points in the speech? And then I ask myself why. And twice is just a general rule. Sometimes you can go even deeper. It all depends on the topic. You'll get your own knack for it. But if that makes sense, that's just something I do. I'm not gonna say it works for everybody. It probably doesn't, but it's just something that's personally worked for me. Okay, jellyfish. All right. Yes, be confident. Okay, so that's kind of, yeah, if that makes sense. Does anyone have any questions about that? All right, cool. So once more, I'm gonna go over this stuff and then I'll go back over the assignment. So in when I give you this assignment, it's basically just to come up with a speech, and I'll show you the actual assignment in a second. But what I want you to do is I really want you to think about all of this stuff when you're writing the speech. I want you to think about, the AGD, try to have most of these elements if you can when you're writing the speech. And again, I have sent out the lecture. If you need it, you can just private message me if you want. If you want to watch it again, or if you're just absent and you just weren't there, or you just for some reason were asleep, then it's fine. Just let me know and you can watch it again. So again, like we talked about the introduction, the AGD, background, thesis. We talked about your conclusion as well. The big things were the preview and the conclusion. And again, we talked about this thing about think and feel. I want you to keep this in mind when you write your speech. I'm not asking you to put in a ton of emotion. I know that especially if it's your first time writing speeches, there won't be a lot, but that's fine. We talked again, and this part is how you're going to give the speech. So that's how you write it when you're like at home or whatever. And this is how you give it hopefully tomorrow. There's a limited amount of this that we can do over Zoom. So obviously it'll be a little bit harder for me to see hand gestures. It'll be a little bit harder for me to see body positioning, but we can still try at least to get a lot of this done. And yeah, so I want you to keep in mind this stuff when you're giving the speech. And then again, this is just some little thing that I do for memorization. So here's kind of your assignment. I think it's here. Yeah, I wrote it here. Okay. So, okay, first of all, the only way you're going to get better at this stuff is practice. I told you everything, but just because you heard it doesn't mean you can do it, right? The hardest part is implementing it into practice. So now at least you know what to practice, but you still got to practice it, right? And so this is kind of what I want you to do. I want you to write a 2 to 3 minute speech on one of your strongest beliefs. And the reason for that is I really want there to be a thesis and I want there to be points to back it up. I don't want it to be like an informational speech where you just talk about whales. Like, no, I don't want that, just because most speeches you give will have some type of persuasive purpose. Most people don't just lecture about one topic just for information purposes, at least for now. And so 2 to 3 minutes, that's not a hard rule. I don't want it to be shorter than like a minute because that's not really a speech. And I don't obviously want it to be longer than like 4 minutes or 5 minutes.
So we write a 2 to 3. So we write a 2 to 3 minute speech, or like the speech that when we say it out, it's 2 to 3 minutes.
Well, when you say it out, it's 2 to 3 minutes. So you can write a speech if you want. You can write bullet points if you want. You could do nothing if you really wanted, but I don't think that would be wise. I think at least bullet points you should at least try.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
At least before you give your speech. And so, yeah. So what was I going to say? Okay, yeah. So aim for 2 to 3 minutes. If you go over like 5 minutes, I might actually start cutting you off because obviously if everyone gives a 10-minute speech, we're going to be here for like a year. Okay. So yeah, incorporate as many structural elements and speech elements during your speech. Let's see if we have questions. Okay. Mr. Helm guy. Okay. Yes, I will send you it.
When am I supposed to call you then? What's your name?
Rayhan, you tell me right.
I forgot. Sorry. Oh, yeah, I
I have
forgot.
a question.
Wait,
Are
what?
we gonna be giving the speeches
Sorry.
now?
No, you'll be giving them tomorrow and Thursday.
Okay.
Okay, so hold on. Let me answer the questions in the chat.
Write like about anything.
Yeah, so give me a second. I'll get there. 1 sec. Okay, are we writing our own speech? Yes, you are. Yeah. Don't like copy a speech from online. That'd be bad. I will get you the link. Can you send me that email again, like later right now, because the chat's kind of blown up. Send it to me like in like 5 minutes if you can. Could I
Wait,
use?
what's your email again, Mr. Rayhan? What's your email again?
Wait. Hold on. No, just send me your email in a private chat in like 5 minutes, just so I can get it.
I already did. I already did. I'm just asking for yours.
Okay, yeah, I can send my email if you want. Okay. Can you give us examples of what to talk about? Yes. 1 sec. I think I saw someone say, can you repurpose your school essay? If it's an argumentative essay, go ahead. You can do it. I don't want you to read the essay though. Don't just read the essay. That'd be kind of boring. So, I mean, you can use a script, yes, but I don't want you to just like read a school essay. Or at least if you're going to use a school essay, edit it more so that it's more aligned with the speech. Can you give us examples of what to talk about? So yeah, I think I have an example there. For example, like you could write a speech about how giraffes are the best animal. I want it to be like a belief. So everyone has like, you know, their own opinions on stuff. So I'm sure some of you probably think Minecraft is the best video game created. You could go with that if like that's a speech you wanted to give. Maybe you think dogs are the best animal. You can go with that. Maybe you think chocolate is the best dessert. That's a speech too. There's like endless opportunities. So the point is it's supposed to be easy. Pick something that you know a lot about. Pick something that's easy for you to talk about. And that's basically the big thing. If you still have questions, let me know. Are you writing 2 speeches? I think we have a good amount of people, so I don't think we'll have time for 2 speeches, just because we have, I think, 35 people. So if everyone gives a 2-minute speech, that would take up a lot of time. They're 2 to 3
It'll
minutes.
take over an hour.
Yeah, so it'll probably take 2 days. And so most likely you'll have to at least give 1 speech, or most likely you'll only get to give 1 speech. And on Friday, if we have time, I'll let people give some speeches in the beginning if anyone really wants to.
Do the whole day on Friday.
Yeah, we have an hour on Friday, but I don't want to spend the entire time giving speeches because we have some other stuff to talk about.
So how much time will we spend on speeches?
Wait, what?
Like how much time will we spend on speeches? Like 5 minutes? Like 10 minutes?
No, we'll spend Wednesday and Thursday on speeches. And then Friday, we'll probably spend like maybe 15, 20 minutes on speeches. How do you write our speech in 1 day? So, I mean, I don't know what you mean by that. Like, you just use the elements of the speech. We have to send you. You don't have to send me the speech. You'll just be giving it over the call. So everyone will listen, and I want everyone to give feedback too, because everyone has all of the notes, right? They know what should be in a speech at this point. So I want everyone to give feedback, obviously in the chat. We don't want everyone to yell at everybody. So I want everyone to give feedback, not just me. And I will give feedback most likely not for each individual speech, but I'll probably give feedback after like we've gone through 4 or 5 speeches. I'll be like, okay, this is what I've seen so far. And that's probably in the interest of time because we have a lot of people. So if we want everyone to get through 1 speech, it'll take a while. Yeah. Does that answer the questions? Can we do some research? Yeah, of course you can do research. In fact, I want you to do research. I don't want anyone to come up here without any research and just talk. That would be, I mean, yeah, it would not be the best, most likely. So yeah, as far as an estimate of how long it should take, I think it depends obviously on how well you know your topic and stuff, but you could honestly spend anywhere between 20 to even close to like 45 minutes, maybe an hour on this if you want. I mean, I'm not going to tell you how long to spend. I just want to see what you can do. And I think the big thing is just pick like an opinion that you have, I guess. Pick like a belief that you have, and that'll be your speech, if that makes sense. So, for example, here's my opinion that giraffes are the best animal. I don't actually think they're the best animal, but
Huh.
it's just an example. And like there's been like I think the last time I did this, there was a lot of cool speeches. There are speeches about video games, about animals, about like activities, like musical instruments.
I have a question. So basically, for when you're researching the thing, can't you just like can I just like take a few parts from speeches from like speeches on my topic and then just combine them and just use that as my speech? Or like it has to be my own.
Yes and no. So you can take the ideas, but I don't want you to actually copy paste from like a website or something. That'd be
Okay.
that's like plagiarism. That's not good. So you can use their ideas. So for example, if you wanted to give a speech on why Minecraft is amazing, you can look up why is Minecraft amazing, and you can take some of their ideas. I don't want you to copy paste though from like.
1 second, let me switch it up.
Okay, so you can get started right now. If there's any questions, like right when you're getting started, or at least start brainstorming ideas. That way, if you have questions for the next 5-ish minutes, you can let me know. Otherwise, we're pretty much done for this lecture. I think I'm gonna stop recording.